Hello and welcome to my channel In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne and this is my weekly wrap-up. Hello everyone. So I finished, before we left on our trip, Love and the Silver Lining by Tammy L. Gray, which many people had raved about and very much enjoyed and said that it was a great book. And so I was kind of hoping that I would also enjoy it, but you know, sometimes when everyone raves about a book and you actually read it, you're disappointed because you have high expectations. So that was my attitude as I went into it. I was like, well, we'll see. Also, contemporary fiction is not my favorite genre. I don't always love contemporary stories and contemporary romances, so I wasn't sure, but I really loved it. Most of the way through, 75 to 80% of the way through, maybe even 85%, I was thinking, this is a solid 4.5 stars. Definitely enjoying this. Really great book. There were some things I wasn't sure how it was going to wrap up. And there were a handful of things that I wasn't 100% happy about the way they were wrapped up. But I am giving this a solid 5 stars. Excellent writing. It has been a while since I read a story that really pulled me in so much and made me want to keep reading. And that's what it was like with this book. I wanted to keep reading. And it has been a while since I read a book that just made me feel everything with the characters as they were feeling it. It's really well done in that way. I will say it was written in present tense, first person, and that is my least favorite narrative style. And I did notice it on and off throughout the story. And I don't love that. And honestly, it's a little bit hard to classify. It's definitely, there's a romance in there, but it's not really about that so much as it is about the main character's journey of surrender, essentially. There's a lot of other stuff going on in the story, but to sum it up, her journey of surrender. It's mostly about that, but there is definitely a romance. And the romance was very well done. I was very involved in that aspect of the story and the relationship and everything that happened there. I will say that I was a little bit surprised for Bethany House how, I don't know what the word is. Like sometimes the physical aspect was a little bit crossing a line for me. For being a Christian novel especially. So it was a little bit much. So it kind of depends on where your comfort level is with that, how it goes. But overall, it was very good. And in spite of those things, I'm giving it 5 stars because of the author's skill in just really pulling you into the story, pulling you into the characters' lives, helping you to feel drawing you into their emotions and everything they were feeling in this story. And I also like the themes and their resolutions in the main characters, their journeys and what they were learning throughout the story. That aspect was really well done. This is the second book in a series, but you can read it as a standalone. They mention the characters from the first book a few times, but they're not at all part of the story. The characters that are in this book were introduced, I guess, in the first book, but it's definitely something that could be read on its own. I wasn't confused at all. I understood how everything as a story was unraveling. There wasn't any confusion being the second book in a series. So there's no problem in reading this as a standalone if it happens to be the book that you have, which was the case for me. So I did enjoy it very much. I'm giving it 5 stars. In spite of there being a couple caveats there, but it didn't keep me from enjoying the book. It was overall a really enjoyable book. It lived up to the hype and the expectations, and I will definitely be reading more by Tammy L. Gray. I need to read the first one in the series to start with, and then I will find some other books by her. So that is my first update. That clip was taken just before I left on my vacation, and now I am back home and I am going to record the rest of this and just get it up. Thankfully, my day today cleared up considerably.
And so I have more time than I thought that I would have today. So I will be able to get my weekly reading wrap up, which is good because otherwise I would get very backlogged. But I am going to just kind of send it up into the internet without a great deal of editing. So I will try to be concise and get through this. So first of all, I had a fantastic time on vacation, and I have several vlogs planned as a result of it. First of all, we went to DeSmet, South Dakota, where the Ingalls family were the very first settlers who founded that town, helped found that town. And so I have a lot of stuff to share related to that, under the books, etc. So that's going to be a whole separate vlog. And then we went to Fargo, North Dakota. And honestly, there is not a great deal to say about Fargo, North Dakota, but it was my 50th state that I have visited. Yay me! And I was very excited about that. So I have a lot to share about that. So I have a whole special, probably it's going to be a 2-part video series celebrating that. Not specifically about Fargo, but about all the 50 states and complete with book recommendations, all that kind of stuff. So that will be a work in progress. It's going to take a bit. So that's coming up. And then also I will probably do a quick vlog about Chicago as well, because we spent a couple of days in Chicago, and I don't really have anything bookish related to share about Chicago, but I will just throw a little travel vlog out there as a bonus for anybody who is interested in that. So as far as the reading goes, I read a lot on our way out to the Midwest and to South Dakota and North Dakota. I didn't have much time to read on actual vacationing days when we were busy. And then I read quite a bit yesterday on our way back. But I completed a couple more books, and I DNF'd a couple books, and I have a couple things in progress. So besides Love and the Silver Lining, which I already talked about, I also read the 3rd volume of the Select Journals of Emma M. Lyon and enjoyed it just as much as the first 2. Really loved that one. That wasn't on my July TBR, but I was in the mood to read it, and I want to read all of them before the 8th book in the series comes out, which I don't know when that will be. I think it's been pushed back, so I don't know exactly when that will be. So kind of a little bit trying to pace myself, but also I want to read them. That's the 3rd one, so I have 4, 5, 6, and 7 to read, 4 more. So I will try to get those read before the 8th book comes out. And that was very good. If you have not read I think it's the Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon. Anyway, very, very fun series to read. Very creative, fresh approach to storytelling, and really enjoying it. And then the next one that I read, I need to look and see because that was like a week ago. Yes, how could I forget? So, I have mentioned before, I have like 4 big books in progress that I have been kind of slugging my way through. And Paradise Lost is not really like a lengthy book, but it was just more difficult to read. Finished that one. And then Heir of Redclyffe was next. I've been reading that for a long time. I've been buddy reading it with Miriam, and we both have been just kind of taking our time, but we also both got to a point where we're just like, okay, we got to finish this book. So we both finished the book this past week, and so now I am ready with my final thoughts on it. So first of all, it's really long, and I feel like it's too long. So I shouldn't lead with a negative, but in my mind, that is the largest negative for this book. It is much longer than it really has to be. However, Charlotte and Yonge, who wrote the book, I can see that in her storytelling style, she's really building up her characters so that you know them very well and very intimately. And she spends a lot of time getting you into the inner workings of the minds of her 2 primary characters that she's contrasting, and kind of some important satellite characters that are in the story. And you are really getting to know them very well, and she takes her time in doing that. She also takes a lot of time to create a rich family dynamic, because that is a huge element in her story of what she's trying to say, is the dynamics in the family relationship and the parenting and the practical application of what the Bible instructs as far as a Christian family should look like. She is illustrating it in the family relationships, that in good and bad ways, and she definitely has a purpose of that in mind as she is writing the story. So she is taking her time to do all of that. So if she does that very well, would you take away from that by making it a shorter story? Probably. So I'm not sure that she would accomplish what she set out to accomplish if she used fewer words. So, but it is very long for a story that things happen, but not as much as you would think with that many pages. It's like, I don't know, my Kindle copy was like 800 pages or something, or 700 something, I don't know.
So the Heir of Redclyffe is really comparing and contrasting two main characters, Guy and Philip. And Guy is the heir. They're both young men, about the same age. Guy is a little bit younger than Philip. And Guy is the direct heir to the Redclyffe estate. And his cousin, I believe it is, Philip, is the next in line after him. And they're two very different kinds of people. And it's like they start here on this at the beginning of the story. They start where Philip is here and Guy is here. Philip he seems like a guy who's got it all together. He's starting his career in the military. He seems very well respected. Everyone asks for his advice. He seems very solid and stable and dependable, and like he knows what's going on. He seems very mature. And then you have Guy here, who is young and immature, and he comes from a line of undependable people who are prone to temper tantrums. He has a bit of a family history there, some skeletons in the closet. So a little bit of a sketchy, it seems at first, character. But as the story goes on, it kind of goes like this. So they kind of trade places in the reader's estimation as more and more is revealed about them. And also, it is a bit of a coming of age story, and that Guy grows and develops through the story and becomes a very mature and responsible person who is determined to break the cycles of family history, of things that have happened in the past in his family, and he wants to start a fresh leaf on the family tree and begin again. So he has significant character development throughout the story. But the more you get to know Philip, the more Philip kind of devolves through the story, and things happen in the story that kind of harden his heart and make him critical and resentful, and he falls in your estimation as the story goes on. And there's a definite contrast between the person who seems to have it all together and seems to be the wise, mature person versus the person who is foolish and immature, but he knows it. And so he relies on the advice of people around him. He develops strong relationships with the people around him, and they help him to become a better person. And so I started with the negative of this book, my negative reaction to it, but I want to add a positive element to it because I didn't hate it altogether. It was a little bit long, but there were really good things about it. I really like what Charlotte was doing here with this, with her contrasting these two main characters and the ways that they interact with the people around them. Philip was a very interesting villain, if there's a villain in the story, in that he's like a person you might know, someone who is so self-righteous and critical, you can't talk to them because they're so convinced, the self-righteousness convinces them that they are absolutely right and that they are in the right. And so they can't be shaken from that because they have this strong moral center that is telling them that they're absolutely right about this. Even when, as the reader, Charlotte M. Yonge makes it very clear to you through the narration of the story that he is dead wrong. He's convinced he's 100% right, and you can't convince him otherwise, but he's dead wrong. So he's really a very interestingly drawn villain. Now, he's not really a villain. He's more like the anti-hero. Like he's a foil to contrast the kind of character, the character of humble servant leadership that she's trying to illustrate in Guy. And so he's providing like a good contrast to that. So he's not so much a villain as just an opportunity to highlight, cast light on the positive character she's trying to show in Guy. So I appreciate what she was doing with this story. And it's very Victorian in its length and its descriptions, like the lengthy, detailed descriptions in the style of the story and in the moralistic overtones of the story. She definitely has an agenda that she is writing from, and it's very obvious on every page. It's not one that I would fully disagree with. I also don't 100% fully agree with some of the ways that some of the relationships played out, and that she was highlighting as a really positive, good thing. I wasn't 100% on board fully with that, but it wasn't egregiously wrong either. It was just, I wasn't my cup of tea 100%, I don't think. But I did really love her digging deep into these characters. I loved the subtlety of the story that she was telling and the way that she was comparing and contrasting Guy and Philip was really very well done. And it was worth the length in the end. I was glad that I read all the way through. There was a point where I was going to give up on it, but I'm glad that I read it all the way through, and I will be reading more by this author. In the end, I can't remember how many stars I gave it. 3.5 stars. And that's about where I would put it for sure. It wasn't a 5-star read for me, not even a 4-star, but it did rise a little bit above the rest in terms of the craft and the writing and in the characters and in the message that she was conveying. So it wasn't just, middling completely. It was rising above that. And I will be interested in reading some more books by her. So 3.5 stars, maybe 4 stars, but definitely solidly 3.5. So then I DNF'd a couple of books. So let me mention those real quick before I move on to what I am now in the progress of reading or will pick up this week. So first of all, I DNF'd A Most Agreeable Murder by Julia Seals, and I already delivered it to a little free library in D. Smith, South Dakota. And it was just, okay, so on the flap, I think it was on the flap of the book, it described it as something along the lines of Jane Austen meets Shrek meets Agatha Christie. And that's a very apt description, and it was just a little too much for me. The Shrek part was a little bit too much. Now, there aren't any green characters or ogres or monsters, but it is a little bit fantastical / fairy tale-esque in that there are some fantastical creatures that are not realistic. The area where they live is, I believe, called Swampshire or something like that. And so there are the fantastic elements of it. There are these swamps where they punish, girls who don't live by the code that was written for them to live by. And some other elements like that. I mean, you could throw Princess Bride into the mix too. There was a little bit of Princess Bride aspect there. And it was just a little bit too far-fetched for me. I can handle a certain element of far-fetched. Like, I liked the Princess Bride. It goes a little bit zany in some ways. But this was just too much. Too many different elements. And a lot of characters. It was just trying too hard and doing too much. And so all the actual story and the characters and what was going on in the story kind of got overwhelmed by all the extra things in it. And I had too many other books that I was interested in reading. I don't think I would have hated it if I'd read it all the way through. And I think that there are plenty of people who would love the very creative storytelling and the kind of zany aspect of it, the outlandish, fantastical elements to it. It was, I can see where it would be a fun read for many people. But for me, I was just like, no, I don't, I'm making myself read this. I don't want to make myself read this. I'd rather read other things. So I DNF'd that one. The other book that I picked up and DNF'd was, I think, on Kindle Unlimited, or maybe a free or deal that I got on Kindle. And the author was new to me, but it was a retelling of Pride and Prejudice
from Darcy's perspective. So I picked it up for Jane Austen July, another one that wasn't on my TBR. And so I started it, and it was fine, you know, like it was just, you know, your basic retelling, but it would have scenes from the actual novel kind of told from this author's perspective, so not using Jane Austen's language. And the conversations were similar, but not exactly the same. And so that was fine, whatever. And then it would show the scene from Darcy's perspective, writing in his journal or something like that, which was fine. But then I got a little bit of the way in, and they started to build this whole backstory to Darcy, which would be fine. I'd love to have a backstory on Darcy, right? But it does not. There's a lot about Darcy that we don't know, you know, that they're empty things. So you can imagine whatever you want to put in his early adult life prior to the time he met Lizzie. And Austen doesn't mention or reference any prior relationships, but in a lot of retellings that I've read, many of them try to imagine different types of relationships that he would have had, possibly prior to meeting Lizzie. And all of them are, I don't know, of the type, like seedy type relationships of the ones I've read, and which makes sense because he would not have, in his time, he would not have led on a woman of quality and had a serious relationship with one and then dropped her without marrying her. That would have been very much against a person of Darcy's code of honor and the way that gentlemen of that rank behaved in that era. They would have been socially ostracized, and so it's not likely that he would have, someone of his standing and stature would have had a serious relationship with a woman that he was likely to have married. However, it was extremely common in that era and in that time for men of that stature to have all kinds of other relationships up until that point. So a lot of times when authors retelling the story of Pride and Prejudice, filling in the holes in Darcy's life, they kind of throw in those types of relationships. And this one was just so far-fetched. It was about him being in Rome and falling in love with an opera singer or something. And I was like, I'm not here for that. So I DNF'd that one. And so now what I am currently reading and hope to read, Miriam and I are also buddy reading Born of Gilded Mountains by Amanda Dykes, and I am loving this so much. We're about 2/3 of the way through, I guess, and just reading a couple chapters every day. Loving this so much. I am sure that I will talk quite a bit about it when I am finished with it, but definitely is heading up to be a 5-star read for me, 100%. My sister brought this one on the trip and she read it, so then she handed it off to me when she was done, so I'm borrowing this. This is A Winter by the Sea by Julie Klassen, which also fits for Jane Austen July as being it's not an Austen retelling, but it's set in the Regency era, and it's set in a sea town, like a beach town, so that fits for one of the prompts in the summer Beaches and Books challenge. And what is that town? Sidmouth? So I can't remember. I don't know. Anyways, this is the second book in this series. So I have been wanting to read this one. On Devonshire Shores is the name of the series by Julie Klassen. This one is very much similar to her Ivy Green series, I think it was, where it's, you know, a village story, a series set in a village, and it's as much about the village and the people in the village and the family there as it is about the things that actually happen in the story. So it's more slower paced, and think like Cranford or something like that, you know. It's more along those lines, and so it's something that you just kind of enjoy. It's not like a gripping story per se or a really detailed plot. It's just enjoyable and pleasant to read. And then I am reading Jane Austen at Home by Lucy Worsley, and about 1/3 of the way through that one, I think I've gotten through 11 chapters, and I'm really enjoying the historical aspect of learning more about Austen and her family and her life. There are a lot of details and tidbits and information in here that I did not know before. My TBR is growing exponentially because of the materials that she's referencing that I'm curious to read for myself. I will say I am struggling a little bit with the aspect of this book where she is editorializing, and not editorializing so much as interpreting the facts. And sometimes the way she writes a section, I feel like it's very loosely based in fact. I mean, there's plenty of factual based information in here with references and complete information, but sometimes there's a spin on things and it's not made clear. Like if you're just reading it casually and not closely, you will walk away feeling a certain way about Austen or her family or the situation that is not founded in fact. It's more Lucy Worsley's opinion, and it could be right. Many times, I feel like her opinion could be spot on, and other times I would disagree with it thoroughly. Let me just give an example. So at the end of chapter 9, it says, in the middle of all this detail, was Jane happy at home? So it's talking about her teenage years, early teenage years and life and all the things going on. It says, Jane's mother knew that there was something strange and wild about her younger daughter. She looked forward to the time when Cassandra would surely be steadily married, but she expected Jane to go off somewhere unknown in a manner matching her character. Quote, the Lord knows where, unquote. And so that quote has a reference to a book, a letter, I believe, that Jane Austen's mom wrote, Mrs. Austen to Mary Austen in November of 1796. But the only part that's quoted is the Lord knows where. The rest of it, it's not clear if that is Lucy Worsley's summation of what Jane Austen's mom had written, or was it what she had written, just not, directly quoted, or is she just putting in her own words? Or did she just make it all up? It's hard to know because it's not quoted and it's not clear how much of that paragraph is coming from Mrs. Austen's actual words and how much Lucy Worsley wrote herself. How much was her thought and opinion and how much was actually Mrs. Austen's. And then it continues on this vein of trying to answer the question, was Jane happy at home? And it says, even with a comfortable home like the rectory, it was mind-numbing to visit the same members, blah, blah, blah. One response to boredom was to be ill, and Jane's mother, on medical advice, took 12 drops of laudanum at bedtime. That 12 drops of laudanum is again in quotes, but there's no reference saying where it comes from. It also goes on to talk about Mrs. Austen taking laudanum, but it doesn't ever say if that was a particular incident at this particular time for an acute sickness, or was this an ongoing thing? Was this her whole entire life she took 12 drops of laudanum? It doesn't say here in this. Like, now I know that laudanum was commonly used to treat illnesses back then, and to treat a variety of things, huge variety of things, and that it was very common for people to take it frequently and also to become addicted to it. And I know, and I have heard that Mrs. Austen had used it, but I don't know any more than that. And this doesn't make it any clearer. She quotes from a letter about Jane, about her mom, but it doesn't say like when that letter was written. There are quotes from it, but there's no reference to when the letter was written. So we don't know if it was at this time. The way it's worded, it's not clear that this is at this time. It's just saying at some point in time, Jane Austen wrote this note that her mother has a cold, but she doesn't have much compassion for colds. And then it compares Mrs. Austen to Mrs. Bennet in the book, which, people have made that comparison before. That's nothing new. And then it said, Mrs. Bennet lived only to get her daughters married, her consolation for disappointment being visiting and news. Would the same fate be Jane's? And so she's, again, this whole section is trying to answer the question, was Jane happy at home? And she's building a case that Mrs. Austen had concerns about her daughter, that she wasn't going to be settled and happy, that this drove her, and the boredom in her life drove her to taking laudanum, and that she was disappointed that Jane wasn't getting married. And then the end of the chapter says, but it was the very tedium of the rectory that forced Jane to take her daily life and turn it into art. So in contrast to her mom, instead of turning to laudanum, she turned to writing her stories. And then it says, one of her early literary admirers, Julie Kavanaugh, would see through Jane's jokes to the quiet desperation beneath.
Jane, wrote Kavanaugh in 1862, seems to have been struck especially with its small vanities and small falsehoods of life. If we look under the shrewdness and quiet satire of her story, she continued, we shall find a much keener sense of disappointment than of joy fulfilled. No wonder ladies turn to laudanum. I just couldn't follow the dots in that at all. I really struggled there. So, and that sort of thing is not uncommon in this story. I'm writing a lot of little notes in here, basically arguing with some of the conclusions or some of the interpretations that Lucy Worsley is giving to events and to things that people said. She's referencing often that Austen's family, like her nieces and nephews and whatever, people who came after her, when she was so popular in public's eye and everyone wanted to know more, her family was put in the spotlight and everybody was asking them about Jane Austen, what they remembered about her, etc. And Lucy Worsley's contention is that a lot of what they said was spin, basically, because they wanted to present a certain picture of Austen to the public, which I think is accurate. I wouldn't argue with that. I think that's probably true. Also, many of them were very young when they knew Jane, so they are looking back with memories of childhood and not intimate personal knowledge of her as an adult. So again, it's colored by that. So I get what she's saying about that. But then she's trying to create, it seems to me, like a contrasting story, that it wasn't all of that fun and games and beautiful and rainbows and sunshine, etc. And that there was this problem. And it feels like she's digging too hard to create conflict where it wasn't necessarily, I feel like. So anyway, there are other things, but overall I'm enjoying the historic aspects of the story and learning more about Austen, of course. And I am looking forward to reading more of this book. Tammy, I Believe in Your Shelf, and I are going to be picking up Frankenstein and reading it over the next week or so. And I haven't started it yet, but that is definitely 100% on the docket for this week. That and Born of Gilded Mountains and Jane Austen at Home are priorities this week. I kind of also really want to read this because it actually came in the library. I Must Betray You by Ruta Sepetys, which was Protagonist Pub's book club read for June. And I couldn't get it from the library, but it finally came in. And I kind of want to read it. I'm not sure when, but I have that on deck to pick up as soon as I can. Because then they're reading The Ice Swan by Ciesielski for July, and I kind of want to read that one. I read one other book by the author and didn't love it, and my sister has read a different book by the author and she hated it, but she did like Ice Swans, and a lot of people gave really good reviews to that one, so I am kind of interested in reading that, but we'll see what I actually end up having time for to get to in July. So that is my week, and I need to finish this and start getting it uploaded. So yeah, let me know how your week has gone and what you have been doing reading wise, and I look forward to hearing from you in the comments. Talk to you next time. Bye.